What's up, storytellers? I'm Garlic here, and welcome to the Garlic Marketing Show. We've got a very, very special guest we're going to talk about in a second, but don't forget that the show is always brought to you by storycruise.com. You know, if you're looking to tell the stories of your business, if you're looking to grow your business with video, which is more important, if not essential, then you need to go to storycruise.com. You can find local editors, local videographers that are trained in marketing, because not every filmmaker is trained in marketing. You can also learn the latest strategies, and you can learn from the giants of video. So today's guest is one of my favorites. It's one of my favorite interviews of all time, and I've had some amazing ones. But this one today is with Pat Williams. He's one of the co-founders of Orlando Magic. He was president of the 76ers. He ran major sports leagues teams. He's written 100 books, 56 marathons. We'll talk about that throughout it. Super accomplished guy. The first half of the interview, we're going to go into character, what it takes. And I think more than ever, this is important. We actually did this interview a few days before coronavirus really started locking things down. And when you think about it, how it really foretold what we were going to need to get through these events. I think it is a super powerful, motivational interview with one of the great leaders. Pat's done so much, and you'll see throughout it, he's still a humble, intelligent, well-read, hard-working guy in his 80s. What a life. But you also learn not only just about the characters, but you learn his stories of marketing, what it took, what he learned early on from mentors, and what it took to build the Magic, to start the Magic, to do cool marketing that kept the Magic going, and to bring in great players. And we talk about Walt Disney, who's written a book on, John Wooden. I mean, there's so much in leadership, so much in marketing that you are going to learn on this episode. I'm super excited for you to listen to it. And when you listen to it, if you take anything away, please let Pat know. Go over to his Facebook page, go over to his LinkedIn, go tell him what you learned. And let me know too. I really appreciate any type of input. But without further ado, here's Pat Williams on the Garlic Marketing Show. Welcome to a very special Garlic Marketing Show. I am Garlic here, and I definitely have our most accomplished guest, possibly one of the most accomplished people living today. I'm going to go through his list because I can't memorize this. He was GM of the Chicago Bulls, is credited with saving the Bulls, invented the first mascot, worked for Atlanta Hawks, Philadelphia 76ers, where he brought Dr. J, and of course, co-founded our team, Orlando Magic. Built tons of great basketball teams, drafted Shaq, traded for Penny Hardaway, ushered in the Dwight Howard era, and especially in his free time, authored 100 books. Raised a family of 19, and coincidentally 19 of his former players went on to be head coaches in the NBA, 58 marathons, and has also scaled Mount Rainier, and is also a cancer survivor, and on top of that, wrestled a bear. Pat Williams, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. I really appreciate you being on the show, and I mean, you've led an amazing life, and it's been phenomenal. I want to talk to you today about leadership, and specifically, and storytelling. So this book, which is amazing, Character Carved in Stone, is your latest book. How did you collect the stories for it?
Well, on that particular case, I was at West Point to speak to the cadets, the athletes there, and afterwards they gave me a tour of the campus. And there's a beautiful park looking out over the Hudson River. And I noticed in this park, Trophy Point it's called, there were a series of benches, 12 of them. The benches were all the same, but there was a different word carved into the end of each bench. And I took the time to go look at each bench, wrote each word down, and then I thought, boy, this is a well-kept secret. It's pretty powerful. Those benches were there, and those words were there to remind the West Point cadets that this is how you should live your life. So I thought, boy, I think there's a book there. And there was. We wrote a chapter on each one of those words using a West Point graduate or a West Point product to flesh out that word. We had quite a time putting it together, and I'm glad that you approve.
Well, I mean, I more than approve. There's certain books that I read on an annual basis over and over again, and because for inspiration or to remind me of things, and this will definitely be one of them.
Good.
I mean, the stories in it, not only are they great stories, but they are detailed, and I love the way you weave in your leadership message into it. You're not pounding over the head with the leadership message, it's woven in. But the first one you talk about is compassion. Compassion is so important. But most people don't think of military and don't think of sports as being a place for compassion. Why do you feel compassion is so critical in leadership?
Well, I think it relates to people skills, and great leaders have a heart for people. They care about people. They're interested in people. They have empathy for people. The very best leaders do. They love people. And in that first chapter, we used General Ulysses S. Grant, a West Point graduate. We don't generally think of him as a man of compassion, but he was. He cared deeply about his soldiers. He cared deeply about the horses that they used in those days. He was a horseman. And if he saw anybody abusing a horse, he would just go crazy and reprimand that particular person. And of course, at the end of the war, when the time came for Robert E. Lee to surrender, Grant treated him with compassion as a fellow American, a fellow citizen, and made it easy on his soldiers, the Southern soldiers, to keep their horses, go back to their farms, and just live their life. He didn't want to punish them. The war was over, and he had compassion and wanted the states to be reunited again. So Grant was a key person in that regard.
And that was a phenomenal story, because I've read a lot about Grant, and they've seldom focused on that compassion aspect of it, which is, it's important. And in fact, he almost resigned, as you said in the book, because they were going to arrest the Southern troops and the Southern leaders and keep them arrested. That was a phenomenal story. I mean, in this book, you have the story of Schwarzkopf is amazing. I never knew that story of him saving his troops. The other stories of Michael Collins, that's a phenomenal story. And in fact, there's a great story about the founder of West Point and him asking for the dismissal. He had to dismiss Edgar Allan Poe, which I never knew either. And today actually is the anniversary of when he would have been dismissed, according to the book, which was really neat. But of all those stories, which one sunk home with you the most?
I'm not sure that I could single them out. It's kind of like, who's your favorite child? Or I get asked frequently, what's the favorite book that you've written? Well, when I was writing each book, that was the favorite book. Hopefully the latest book is your best one. Mm-hmm. I would hope that you keep improving with each book. But I think people will find, as they get into Character Carved in Stone, that it's going to keep them engaged. We go from one word to the next word to the next word, and we were fortunate enough to find West Point graduates who really modeled that particular word. So you're going to read about Dwight D. Eisenhower, you're going to read about Douglas MacArthur, you're going to read about Coach Mike Krzyzewski, you're going to read about a women's basketball coach, Maggie Dixon, and you're going to read about some West Point people perhaps you didn't know about. Some will be well known, others maybe not quite so well known. But I think you'll find that there's some valuable leadership material there for everybody.
100%. I mean, it's not, like I said, the stories are compelling to remind you of what these words mean. Because a lot of these words now are bantered about, and they're used, and we use them too lightly. And another one of those words I feel is leadership, where people use it all the time, but it's such an important word. But do you feel everyone should be studying leadership, every single person?
I do. Like, everybody is a leader in some form. If you're a husband, you're a leader. If you're a father or a mother, if you're grandparents, you're leaders. If you are involved in some aspect of your work, your career, if you're dealing in youth sports, for example, if you are dealing in any aspect of the political scene, you're a leader. Mm-hmm. And if you do nothing but lead yourself, which you have to do, you're a leader. So I think it's important for people to study leadership, study the great leaders of history, keep learning about it, keep improving as a leader. Our nation depends on outstanding leadership at all levels. So that's why I urge people to study it and examine great leaders. Read books about the great leaders of history. The more you know about leadership and the more you put it into practice, the more success you're going to have. And we need successful leaders at every level in our country.
That's fantastic. That's so true. And everyone should be, I agree, everyone should be a leader, and this is a great way to learn is through stories. But you have an amazing history of leadership. It's second to few, and I'm so impressed with it. But one of the things that, you actually were in an interview with one of my friends, Dean, a few years ago, and you talked about finding your passion and how you've had this much energy to be a good leader. And you said you were a talent for leadership, but also a talent for administration. And it's where those talent and opportunity came together that really made you successful. But in really looking at your history, especially your first mentor, I think one of your first mentors, Bill Beck, I saw also a history of marketing and promotion. How do you feel marketing and promotion are important to a leader?
Well, if you don't promote, I learned, a terrible thing happens: nothing. And I was fascinated by Bill Beck, the great baseball promoter. I was fortunate enough to meet him when I was very young. And he somehow or other took a liking to me and was very generous with his time. I never worked for him, but he made enormous investments in me. And so I bought into his philosophy of selling sports, and it wasn't very complicated. He says, if you sell, in my case, it was minor league baseball where I started. He said, if you're going to sell this on the won and loss column, he said, that's too risky because you really don't have a lot of control over that. In minor league baseball, the major league team provides the players and they determine what becomes of those players. But you can guarantee a fun night at the ballpark. That was Beck's philosophy. You can't beat fun at the old ballpark. That was how he went about it. So he was constantly looking for ways to entertain his fans, to surprise them, to show them a good time. Give them something to go back home on with a good memory. He was sports marketing really before there was even a name for it. And today you're seeing a lot of promoting, a lot of marketing, but Beck was way ahead of his time. And so he had an enormous influence on me, and I've followed that all the way through my career, through the NBA, 51 years in the NBA, that you've got to make it fun for the people to come out to the game. Yes, you want to win and you want to put a strong product on the floor or in the field, but you also want to make it a memorable, fun night. And that's where Beck comes in. He pioneered that, and we're all kind of following in his footsteps.
That's fantastic. And it's so interesting because I really, before doing a lot of research, I didn't know a lot about Bill Beck. I'm from Milwaukee originally, so I didn't know he owned the Brewers when they were a minor league team. But you've written also some other amazing books. To my idols, to John Wooden and Walt Disney, phenomenal books on both of them. But one of, I see is Walt Disney's strengths, and I was lucky enough to be in an interview with Bob Gurr, and he talked about how Walt was able to convince everyone that they could do whatever, especially his team. How important was that marketing to get players and to marketing to keep the players there and keep the players excited? Because you brought Shaq and Penny and Dwight and Dr. J and these amazing players. I mean, it's not just about, you have to be marketing to them, right?
Well, Ian, let's go back. You started first talking about Walt Disney. Let's talk about Walt for a minute.
Yeah.
I moved here to Orlando. Well, it's 34 years ago now, and I became Disneyized, which can happen. And I became particularly fascinated with Walt Disney himself. He had passed away at that point, but I kept running into senior Disney executives here in Orlando who had worked with him back in California, and I always wanted to pick their brains, to learn more about Walt. So I became intrigued with the man. We ended up writing 3 books about him. Mm-hmm. But Walt was a visionary. Mm-hmm. He had the ability to see way down the road. He saw things that the rest of us didn't see. Great leaders are visionaries, first of all, and he had a vision for full-length animated features. He had a vision for what television could do. He had a vision about a theme park where a family could go. People thought he was crazy. People closest to him thought he was going to bankrupt the company. But Walt had this ability to see what the public would pay for. Brilliant in that regard. He also, as you mentioned, had the ability to see people's talent and where they would best fit. And there might be a guy over here in animation, and he would suddenly say, "I want you over here in building this theme park." And the guy would say, "No, wait a minute, I'm an animator." But years later, that fellow would say, "Walt saw something in me that I didn't see." That's another great mark of leadership. Studying your people and knowing their talents and where they best fit in. Walt was many things to many people, and today we see his company that he founded just thriving around the world. Walt probably wouldn't be surprised. He probably envisioned that whole thing. If we could talk to him today, he probably saw it all. So, and he knew how to sell that product. Mm-hmm. And the point I made was he had these marvelous ideas, but he also knew what the public would pay for. It's great to have ideas, but if the public has no interest in it, well, you're going to go bankrupt. But Walt knew what they would pay for. That's another great mark of marketing. John Wooden, you mentioned. I have written 4 books about Coach Wooden. I felt very honored that he allowed me into his life. This was late in his life. He lived till 99. But I was able to spend time with him, and he was always very generous with his time, always very gracious, always very accommodating. This is the greatest coach in the history of sports. But yet there was something about the man that just attracted people. He was very low-key. He was not a dynamic person in that regard. He was soft-spoken, but people flocked to him to absorb his wisdom. And that's what he had. It's a rare quality. But when you could find a man or a woman who has wisdom, you'll notice that people flock to that person, wanting to absorb that wisdom. And Coach Wooden, above all, was loaded with wisdom that he enjoyed sharing with people. I think he genuinely enjoyed investing in other people. And he didn't even have to know the person. An unknown high school coach wanted to come and visit with him. He'd welcome him to his condo and spend as much time with him as that coach wanted. It's quite fascinating. So much to learn from those kinds of people. I've written a book about Coach Vince Lombardi. Wrote a book about Coach Bear Bryant, Coach Bobby Bowden. So much to learn from these remarkable people. We wrote a book about Abraham Lincoln, co-wrote a book about Lincoln some years back. So I think the more we study those kind of people and learn from them, the more we can take from them and apply to our own lives. Not that we're going to imitate people, but if you can take the best qualities from people that you admire greatly, you're going to be ahead of the game.
That's great advice. And there's so many amazing people that you've written about. And bring it back to John Wooden, and one of the things that I always get from him and I always talk about is fundamentals. And fundamentals of life, but also, because I look at marketing, and the reason I'm passionate is I believe the only way we're going to change anything, change worlds, change minds, is through marketing. We have to show the value of it. And coming back to marketing fundamentals, Bill Veeck talked about shaking the hands of the people. And you did the same thing. You were out pretty much every game, right? As people walked out.
Well, I took from Bill many things. First of all, he was a reader. He had not finished, he didn't go to college, very briefly. But two things, he was well read and he was widely read. Mm-hmm. Those are two marvelous compliments you can pay anybody when you say they're well read. And Bill always, every time I was with him, he had an armful of books. And he read voraciously about many topics. And I took from him the importance of reading. He was also fascinated with the written word. Bill was a marvelous writer. He would write columns, or he would write editorial pieces, but he had a great gift of writing. I took that from him. He also, in running a ball club, was available to the people. Mm-hmm. He would answer his own phone. You didn't have to go through a battery of secretaries to get to him. He opened his own mail and answered it. He roamed around his ballparks, he didn't sit in a suite or a box. After the games, on many nights, he'd be there greeting the people as they left. And that led to another great quality that impacted me, the importance of speaking in public. Bill thought if I could just get to people at their organizations and address them and talk baseball or whatever the topic was, that they're going to end up perhaps at my ballpark. So I bought into that early, the importance of developing the ability to speak publicly. Bill was a very entertaining speaker. People loved to go and hear him. That became something that became a huge part of my life and my career. So many things that we can take when we begin to really study people. Not that we're to be somebody we aren't, but I took those attributes, being visible and available, and being a reader, and being a writer. Bill also never cursed. He talked about that. He said there's always a more intelligent word to use than some four-letter word. And he was not profane. Now, this was a guy immersed in the life of baseball where language can get a little bit salty, quite salty. But I saw that in him, and that became something I wanted to emulate as well. So I guess what I'm saying is it's important to have heroes in your life. Not that they're perfect, not that they can't stumble and fall. They can. But we need people to look up to and admire. And I've got numbers of life heroes. And many of these heroes I've only known through books. Abraham Lincoln is a hero. Theodore Roosevelt is a hero. You can go back in history. Churchill is a hero. John F. Kennedy's a hero. Ronald Reagan. There are certain heroes that we have, and we need them. And in sports, we could sit here and talk for an hour about sports heroes of mine. So it's important to have those men and women in your life that you emulate and you look up to.
And so speaking, I mean, obviously you have a great speaking career. I was watching some of your talks, and they're fantastic. They're inspiring. But when we talk about heroes, besides Bill, who else did you emulate, did you have as a hero when it came to public speaking?
Well, that's a good question. I would say probably some of the greatest men of history, men and women of history. Lincoln was a marvelous speaker. We don't have tape of him, but we certainly have copies of his speeches and people who heard him. Theodore Roosevelt was a marvelous communicator. So was FDR with his style. John F. Kennedy had a powerful ability to move people. And then, of course, you've got the sports communicators. There have been some marvelous sports people who communicate. Bobby Bowden was always very effective. And Tommy Lasorda, the Dodger manager, was terrific in front of people. And I heard them all. And you can always I've always taken little things from different speakers. But above all, the best speakers, the best communicators are storytellers. They realize that we're hardwired to retain stories, not PowerPoints. Thank goodness. Someone once said the world is not made up of atoms, it's made up of stories. So it's important as a speaker to collect stories, save them, write them down, and particularly in books. When you turn a page, I always feel it's important to have a story on every 2 pages. And then when you turn the next page, you want another story. So that people will see quote marks, or they'll see names that they're familiar with, and they'll want to keep turning pages. If they see a lot of statistics or a lot of dry-looking material, they may get bored with the book. Stories really entice us. So when you think about great storytellers, Jesus and his parables, Mr. Lincoln and his yarns, you had John F. Kennedy and his quips. And then, of course, the great communicator, Ronald Reagan, had probably a combination of all of it. He had been a movie actor, and he had been out on the speaking circuit for years, and he was the great communicator, and he knew how to hold an audience, and he knew how to entertain them, and how to make them laugh, and how to make them cry, and he had a great touch for that. So I think it's important for business people in all walks of life to really work at your speaking skills. It's important to do that. And whether you're running a company or whether you're running a Rotary Club or whatever, the most offensive thing you can do is bore people.
So true.
That's a cardinal sin.
Yeah.
But to entertain them, and they look forward to hearing what you have to say this week. And it's the same in the classroom. The best teachers, the best professors, the most memorable ones to people are those professors that could really hold the room and keep their students fascinated and engaged. Not just reading it from a script or whatever, but to really perfect your speaking skills in a classroom where you're meeting with your students, 2-3 times a week. And you should go into that classroom just thinking, boy, how can I really hold these students today and really give them something to chew on? So public speaking is a vital part of any leader's life.
I agree completely. I think it's something that almost everyone needs to have as a skill. So speaking of heroes, obviously, I grew up here. I remember when the start of the Magic, and we're thinking that we're going to get a basketball team, and I thought
you were probably about 5 years old.
Oh, I wish. I was 15. So
when we started the first year.
Yeah. My father had season tickets, and I remember it was the best time ever. But I remember when you first started that. I mean, you're a lot of Orlando's hero because of that. I mean, first sports team here, and really put Orlando on the map. But I want to talk about how you brought all those skills together to get those first season tickets, because man, you had to convince a lot of people to go all in. What did you do?
Well, we started in June of '86. Orlando at that time was not a major city. It was not really a major tourist destination, even though Disney was well established here. But it was still a pretty small city. I left Philadelphia to join the effort here to bring the NBA to Central Florida. Many people thought it was a long shot at best.
Mm-hmm.
But our main job was to convince the community that they could do it, that they could become a major league sports city. So the only way we knew to show that to the league was to ask for $100 deposits on season tickets to a team that did not exist, where there was no arena at that point to play in, and there was no history of major league sports here at all. That's what we were facing. But the community rallied to the cause, and we ended up very quickly through June, July, August. Really about 3 months we had before going to the owners' meetings in September to pitch our case to the owners, and we were able to say we've got deposits on 14,000 season tickets, which was an eye-opener to the league and to those other owners, because those numbers were, they just weren't happening in the NBA at that point. So we got their attention, and then the league began to mull over these 4 different cities that wanted to come in: Miami, Orlando, Charlotte, and Minnesota. And eventually the thinking was, let's take all 4 of them, which really kind of shocked people. I don't think anybody was fully expecting that they would take on 4 new teams, and that's how we got our team.
Oh.
Miami and Charlotte came in 1988, and I was disappointed. I wanted to be in that first round, but then we came in with Minnesota in '89, and that turned out to be a real break for us. It gave us time to build the building properly. And it gave us time to put a staff together well. And it gave us time to do the necessary scouting. As you began to study the expansion draft and our first college draft, and it gave us a little more time to do things thoroughly. So that's how it all started, and here we are. I mean, we're 30 some years into it now, mm-hmm. and the Magic have become a huge part of Central Florida. They're here to stay, and we've had some ups, we've had some down periods, but by and large, our fan base remains very loyal, very much involved. They care deeply about the team, and it's been a wonderful marriage.
So speaking of 30 years ago, so this past Valentine's Day was 30 years since number 12 from the Chicago Bulls walked out in the court when Jordan's jersey disappeared.
Somebody stole his jersey.
Yeah, I remember I was at that game and seeing, because I was all excited. At that point, Michael Jordan, while he was a big player, hadn't won any championships. It was a different team. I mean, it was the same team, but it wasn't the Bulls that we came to know. But it was a big deal. and the magic wand, which was fantastic. But what was that moment like? I mean, because he was arguably the biggest star in the NBA, and you have this, and you're a new team, and his jersey.
Well, we won some. Well, first of all, I was embarrassed.
Yeah.
As a new team, that there was a security failure somewhere, and the greatest player in the world had his jersey stolen in our building. It was. I didn't feel good about it. That something had happened here under our watch. But that first year, we had some memorable moments. We didn't win a whole lot of games, but we upset the Lakers one night, and we knocked off the Bulls one night.
Yep.
In the first preseason game, we beat the world champion Pistons. So there were definitely some highlights in that first year that our fans, to this day, still remember. Eventually, we began to add different pieces, and then the Shaq draft of '92 and the Penny Hardaway acquisition in '93 were the two big breaks we got. And suddenly we were a contender. And got to the finals in '95, which was a huge accomplishment. And we thought we were in for a long ride, but Shaq departed to LA. Penny Hardaway had knee surgery on both knees over time, and he never was able to live to his full potential. But that's life in pro sports. It's a fragile business. You never know from day to day, what's going to play out. But that's where Vec comes in. Every time you come, it should be a fun night, win or lose, and you hope you have a win. But you must make it an entertaining time for people.
And so part of business and marketing and obviously growing a franchise is taking risks. And obviously over time you had to take some risks. Which of your marketing business risks did you take that you were most surprised by the success of?
Well, you never know what's going to fly.
Yeah.
We were approached before our first season. We were the Magic, and two magicians came to visit and said that they wanted to be the team magicians. Well, we didn't know what that meant. But they came with ideas, and so we said to them, okay, we'll give you 4 games here at the start of the season to see what you're all about, and then we'll decide from there. Well, the two guys came, and they had a fistful of ideas, like shooting T-shirts up into the stands. I mean, all the things you see. And after the 4 games, we said, okay, you're in. We like what you're doing. Little did we realize that that was going to trigger a whole wave into every sports arena and stadium and college arena in the country. All of those things that those two guys brought to us are now part of the scene in every sports venue.
Yeah.
Shooting baskets to a flip-up backboard, and just a whole litany of things that these two creative guys came up with in our building.
That's amazing.
And it's now
everywhere.
It's just part of sports.
Yeah, T-shirt can is everywhere.
all the things that they came up with.
I didn't know that all started with those two guys.
That's where it started, right here.
I remember them. That's really, really cool.
And one of those guys, Giovanni, is still around. I'm still in touch with him. The other one, Tim, is no longer living.
Yeah.
But Tim and Giovanni, they were a pair.
Yeah.
And they invented, really, this whole concept of sports marketing that nobody had ever thought of.
Yeah. Actually, I knew Tim. He was a great, great guy. He was a fantastic guy. I didn't know he invented all that. He never even talked about that.
These two, the two of them together, they were partners, magician partners, but they invented a whole new way of presenting sports.
That's really cool.
And in every building, in the NBA and beyond, you see their work being carried out. With every franchise.
It's ubiquitous now. That's amazing.
It's quite a story.
So speaking of now we got the MLB. You're marketing for that. Tell me about this, because obviously, you never stop. I mean, I'm looking at this list of things that you do. You never stop. What brought on MLB?
Well, I've always felt that Orlando could be a Major League Baseball city. We tried once in the 1991 period. That's how Rich DeVos originally got involved here. But the Major Leagues decided to go to Miami. And then in the mid-90s, we tried again. And that's when the Major Leagues went to St. Pete. And so it's been a long wait. But I still believe fervently that this can be a great Major League Baseball town, community, area. And so we are cranking it up again. We have cranked it up to try and convince Major League Baseball that Orlando is where they need to be. How might that happen? Well, we're watching the situation in St. Pete very carefully. They've made it pretty clear that they're going to have to leave there at some point. They have 8 years left on a lease. And we are making it very clear to them that we want them here, about 70 miles east, and that they can have great success here. The major leagues have also said that they plan at some point to expand by 2 more franchises. And we want to be in front of Major League Baseball to show them that this is where you need to be with an expansion team if the move of the Rays doesn't work out. So our job is to get ready. We've got a website, orlandodreamers.com, and we're urging people to go up there and just express their interest. We're working quietly and behind the scenes about a potential stadium, and we're doing everything in our power to be ready when that time comes. We have a nickname, the Orlando Dreamers. We got a logo. We've got a hat. We got the look. Now we just need a team. So I retired from the Magic in May of this past year. And the mission was to get ready to head this effort to try and bring Major League Baseball here. So I'm fully engaged in that process. And I'm convinced we could do it.
Well, if anyone's going to do it, it's you.
Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time.
Good to visit with you.
It's been wonderful. I have one last question I ask, and I mean, you might not have answers for this, but I always ask people, what's the one quote or mantra that they've lived their life by, or that is their favorite quote? Do you have one?
From somebody that I've...
Yeah, when the books or the biographers or people of history, is there something that you...
Well, John Wooden probably had the best one. Make each day your masterpiece. I think that's the one that means the most. Make each day your masterpiece. Think about that for a minute. Mm-hmm. So if you are determined at the start of each day, this is going to be a masterpiece day, and keep doing that for a lifetime, you're going to have a pretty good life. The people around you are going to be deeply moved if they see you living out a masterpiece day every day. That's how Coach Wooden went about his life, and I recommend that to others.
That's phenomenal advice. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. It was wonderful, and thank you all for taking us on your journey. This has been Pat Williams and Iron Garlic and the Garlic Marketing Show.